Over the past 3 years, BeamNG has went from looking like a shitty PS3 game to a shitty PS5 game. No, but really, it looks so good right now. With the addition of PBR materials, better ambient occlusion, motion blur, and bloom, the graphics are slowly catching up to today's standards. Now, of course, we still don't have all the fancy things like path trace lighting, dynamic exposure, a decent looking sky, come on devs, come on, that stuff can wait. But there is one thing that really pisses me off. The game doesn't look as good as it could, even with the features it already has. Let me explain what I mean. Look at how bad the shadows are. Now, you may think that they are meant to look this soft because in real life, sometimes, shadows aren't always razor sharp. But in BeamNG, that is not the case. They are just low resolution, shitty shadows, and there is no option to increase their quality. You may also think that I have no idea what I'm talking about, and that BeamNG just can't render better shadows, but guess what? It already does. For some weird reason, all BeamNG maps have the same low resolution shadows, apart from West Coast USA, where they look much sharper. Devs, why the fuck? Next up, look at the ambient occlusion. Now real quick, if you have absolutely no idea what ambient occlusion is, just know that it's a graphical effect that makes shadows darker in certain places, like under your car or in between your buttons. Why does it make me angry? Well, just like shadows, it's soft and low resolution, and for some reason, it's also full of noise. The funniest thing is that in photo mode, you actually have the option to increase the quality of ambient occlusion, but then there is no such option to do that in regular gameplay. Devs, why aren't ultra settings actually ultra? And finally, the most apparent graphical flaw in BeamNG is the ridiculous amount of pop-in. Like most games, BeamNG has a level of detail system, LOD in short, which makes the game run better by adjusting the quality of objects based on how close you are to them. But in BeamNG, this system has two major issues. First of all, it's incredibly aggressive, even at the highest setting, which means that no matter how good your computer is, you will always see objects shifting around and even materializing out of thin air. And the second issue is that it's just too abrupt. It would be a lot less noticeable if objects smoothly transitioned from one detail level to the next, instead of looking like shit in one frame and then being fully detailed in the next. Some trees actually have smooth transitions from being 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. That wasn't funny, I'm sorry. But the problem is that once it's done smoothly transitioning from 2D to 3D, it immediately goes back at shifting around. But still, the easiest fix for this mid-LOD system would simply be giving the option to increase its distance for those who could actually run it. And in short, all this is kinda like having a car that could reach 250 km per hour, but is instead limited by the manufacturer to 180. Isn't that right, Volvo? And yeah, all this is just frustrating, If only there was a mod that allowed you to increase these. This is the CK Graphics settings mod, and today I'm going to explain what it is, show you what it does, and tell you where to get it. The CK Graphics settings mod was actually released in August of 2022, and it's crazy how no one has talked about it. In fact, I just found out about it a week ago, when someone suggested I should add it to my member-exclusive BeamNG server, which features all of the goofy stream chat builds, repainted and remastered, a weekly map schedule with all of my personal favorites, and gameplay with me whenever I stream. And you can have this, as well as all the other perks of being a channel member for the incredible price of a Happy Meal. I'm so sorry for turning this into an ad, but if it weren't for my channel members, me and you would have never known about this mod. And by the way, if this video gets 50,000 likes, I'll make a video on the best mods for BeamNG, according to my completely honest and unbiased opinion. And with all this out of the way, let me explain. The CK Graphics settings mod is a mod for BeamNG Drive that enables users to change settings that were previously hidden or not available. This mod features settings that increase graphics quality for users with high-end PCs, as well as settings that increase performance for those running absolute potatoes. One important detail is the fact that this mod was created by Carkiller, who is part of the original BeamNG dev team. Why is this an important detail? Well, if you go to Carkiller's profile on the BeamNG forums, you can see that he's responsible for mod support, the Linux version, and would you look at that, the Vulkan API. Remember this detail, it's going to be useful later on. And now, let me show you. So, we're here in beautiful Italy with 4K ultra settings, and as you can see, the graphics are so bad, my eyeballs have completely decomposed in the time it has taken you to realize Carmity was peacefully sunbathing on the other side of the map.
The fuck you looking at?
Jokes aside, it looks good, and we're about to make it look even better. So, let's pull up the CK graphics settings, and as you can see, it gives you options for high-end graphics, low-end graphics, 2 sliders to control LOD. I have absolutely no idea what these do, and at the bottom, it gives you a bunch of information, the most useful of which is FPS, so that you can immediately see how the settings you change impact performance. Since we want to make the game look better, let's expand. And here, you'll find a setting for higher quality ambient occlusion, one for higher shadow resolution, and one for higher terrain quality. So let's start with the first one, higher quality ambient occlusion. This is a setting that was only available in photo mode, but now we can also have it in regular gameplay. And as you can see, it makes a world of a difference. Right? I don't know, you're probably watching this video on a tiny mobile phone screen or whatever, so let me properly walk you through it. And right out of the gate, our average frame rate dropped from 133 FPS down to 126, which is, to be honest, a pretty small difference, considering how good it makes the game look. Now, if you focus on the car, the changes are pretty negligible. You can notice a slight difference in the bed, and the shading along the edges of the car appears to be a little bit more precise. But if we move our attention to what's under the car, we can then notice a much bigger difference. The high quality ambient occlusion does a good job of darkening the area under the car while still retaining detail, while the regular one turns it into a blurry mess. But by far the biggest difference is when it comes to groups of thin objects. For example, look at the grass. Now that is a pretty crazy difference, since, as I said, it makes a huge difference on groups of thin objects. This also applies to barriers, trees, grills, and if you're British, even to your teeth. Now unfortunately, this higher quality ambient occlusion isn't perfect, as you still get a noticeable amount of noise. But overall, it's so much better than the vanilla one, especially when it barely makes a difference to your frame rate. Now the second setting is higher shadow resolution, and this one is a lot more apparent compared to the previous one. Man, does this look good. The most apparent improvement is with moving shadows, like the ones from trees. Look at how much more precise the shadow's edges are and how much less they shift around. Look at how much crisper this bush looks. Look at this shadow on the pigeon's bed. And man, look out in the distance. It seems like shadows are being rendered further, but actually, that isn't the case. What's really happening is that distant shadows are so soft in the vanilla game that they're barely noticeable. But with this resolution increase, they become visible again, which effectively makes it look like they're being rendered further than before. And the crazy part is that this setting takes us from 133 FPS to 130. I really struggle to understand why this isn't in the game already. Technically, it is in the game already, but just on one map. I don't know, maybe it's barely doing anything because it's running on a 4090 and it's bottleneck anyways. So to make sure, we'll check how it runs on lower end hardware later on in the video. And the third and final setting is higher terrain quality. Now, this could easily be mistaken with better LOD, but it's actually a little different. If this setting controlled LOD, you'd be able to see the pole thing at the top of the mountain. But since it only controls the quality of the terrain, that doesn't happen. But what exactly does it do? Well, as you can see, it fixes a bunch of weird stuff going on in the distance. For example, take a look at what is supposed to be a road on this side of this cliff. Come on man, what the f is that roller coaster looking thing? Bro, luckily with just a press of this button, it all goes away. Unfortunately, in terms of performance, this setting is a little more expensive compared to the others, taking us from 133 FPS down to around 124. Is it worth it though? In my opinion, yes. And finally, before moving on to the mid-range and low-end computers, that sounded American, let's talk about the sliders. The first slider controls the amount of grass. If you max out this setting in vanilla BeamNG, the grass kinda looks like my beard. Decent, but slightly patchy. But with the mod, we can increase the grass density from 100 up to 800. Which is stupid. You shouldn't do that. Not because it tanks your FPS, it's actually not that bad, but because it just looks wrong. Instead, you should keep it at around 250, which looks a lot more realistic. And guess what? We only lose 6 FPS. As for the other slider, this is the infamous LOD. which should fix most of our pop-in issues. By default, it is set to 150, and as you can see, the pop-in is nasty. Well, luckily, the mod lets us take it up to 800, which is nuts. As you can see, the amount of detail in the distance is insane. And you know what else is insane? The fact that this basically halves our FPS. But I mean, at least we don't have pop-in anymore, so it's totally worth it, right? No. Again, I found the sweet spot between quality and performance to be at a value of 250, which only costs us 7 FPS, which is pretty darn good, considering the amount of detail we have in the distance, and especially how much less noticeable the pop-in is. And now, just like Thanos did with the Infinity Stones, let us combine all these settings to create the next tier of BeamNG graphics. The Extreme preset. Compared to Ultra, the difference is quite big. And from now on, I'll be using these extreme settings in all of my videos. Unfortunately, we do lose a bit of performance. We're getting around 20% less frames compared to Ultra. But personally, I think it's worth it. Now listen, I'ma be real with you. In my opinion, there is not a single reason why higher resolution shadows are not part of the Ultra preset, especially since we already have them in West Coast USA. Devs, just do what you did in West Coast to all the other maps. It is as simple as that, and in fact, they barely even impact performance. And don't even get me started on high quality ambient occlusion being locked in photo mode. Well, it should at least be part of the high preset, let alone Ultra. As for the other settings, I have a theory that we may eventually see an extreme preset in the game, which would come alongside a stable release of the Vulkan API. And remember, the very creator of this mod is part of the BeamNG dev team, which is currently working on the Vulkan version. So I wouldn't be too surprised if my theory actually ended up being correct. And with all this out of the way, let's find out. So, we already know that this mod is for people with high-end computers and people with extremely shit computers. Basically, the two opposite ends of the spectrum. But what about the people in the middle? To test that out, we're using Keith's computer, which, with an i5 and a 3060, perfectly represents a mid-range level of performance. Keith usually plays at 1440p high settings, and in Italy, that gets him 74 FPS. Unfortunately, without even touching the sliders, the three high-end settings drop the frames to 53. But who said we need to enable all three? By only enabling the high quality ambient occlusion for that crispy grass and increasing yellow D to 250 in order to mitigate that nasty pop-in, you get roughly the same performance as the Ultra preset, but with, in my opinion, much better visuals. Okay, not that much, but it just looks sharper. So yes, this confirms that the CK graphics settings mod can also be used by people in the mid-range. And the best thing is that you guys in the middle can actually choose whether you want to optimize it for better visuals or for better performance. It really does come down to what you prefer. If you're aiming for better visuals, keep in mind that you should prioritize resolution first, then the vanilla settings, and finally, if you still have a couple more frames, you can then tweak some stuff in the mod. And since we've concluded that this mod can be useful to pretty much anyone, let me tell you. Well, this is pretty simple. Download it from the link in the description, slap it into BeamNG's mod folder, and once you're in game, you're gonna have to bind the key to bring up the settings. To do that, go to Options, Controls, General Debug, and assign whatever key you want to toggle the graphics settings. I went with minus, as it is unassigned by default, but you can choose whatever you want, even the power button.